Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shyama and today I'm gonna cover the case Lynn family murder case in Australia, and it was a really gruesome and very famous murder case in Australia. So before going to the main video, if you are new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to notify every time I upload a new video. So let's get into the video. So Lynn family murder case was occurred in 2009, and the father, whose name was Min Lin, was 45 years old, and his wife Lily, and her other name was Yun Lin, was 43 years old. They both were migrated from China and they met in Sydney, got married. They had 3 kids: Brenda, who was 15 years old, then Henry, who was 12 years old, and Terry, who was 9 years old. So their first goal in life was to give their children the best life and best education, and for that Lynn decided to open a news agency whose name was the Epping Central News Agency, and the news agency was going quite well. I mean, they were earning $1 million a year, and which was quite good amount of money. And he was also very famous in the community because Min was a very hardworking, soft spoken, kind, and very family oriented man, and the community was really loving him, and he was quite popular in the community too. And later Lily also migrated her sister, whose name was Irene, from China, and she was 39 years old, and she was living with them and working in the news agency. And after having quite some money, they decided to buy a house, and the house was a two-state house, and that was in 55 A Street in New Eppings or North Eppings. So yeah, and then later Min also brought his father and mother from China to Sydney to live with them, but they were staying 30 minutes drive away from their main house, the Min's house, and everything was going quite well. Min's sister Kathy and her husband Robert Z also migrated from China to Australia in 2002. They were living 300 meters away from Lynn's house. Robert claims that he was a successful ear, throat, and nose specialist in China and was hoping the same sort of success in Australia like Lynn had. Robert attempted to open a Chinese restaurant in Australia. He wanted to bring 3 chefs to Australia but denied, and the restaurant unfortunately failed. In 2005, they moved to Sydney to near Lynn family and Lynn's parents. They were very close. Kathy and Irene both worked part-time in Min's news agency. On Friday, the 17th July, the 3 families went to the parents' home for dinner. Everyone was there except Brenda. Because Brenda was in New Caledonia on a school excursion to learn new language, she was a studious, hardworking, and intelligent girl, so it was a regular family dinner. Henry complained to his grandmother that his shoes were broken, and then his grandmother ended up giving him a $50 for winning his badminton competition that made him completely forget about his broken shoes. The grandmother was also trying to convince Henry to stay the night over, but he said that he couldn't stay there because he had a plan with Robert, and he said that he was going to play with Robert the next morning, and he was so excited for that thing. That was a nice family dinner party, but unfortunately, that would be their last family dinner and night that they would ever spend together. The next morning, the news agency didn't open as usual. The bundle of newspapers were outside on the front door of the agency. No one was there, and customers were gathered there to have their magazines and newspapers, but unfortunately, Min was not there. So, some concerned customers called to the house, but no one picked. So they then contacted to Kathy, because Kathy was also worked at that news agency, so they knew his number. I mean her number. So they called her, and she was also so shocked that how this could happen, because she knew her brother, how he is so punctual and hardworking. He would never do such kind of thing. So she got really worried, and when she was on call, Robert was in garage working on some stuffs, and he usually never wakes up early, but that morning he was awake. He was awake and he was cleaning his garage. So they immediately went to Lynn's house, and when they reached, they saw a couple of very weird scenes. The first thing that they noticed, that the house main door was open. Then they entered inside the home, and everything was inside really normal. The shoes were gathered on the front door. The key was sitting on the kitchen bench top. The kids' school bags were sitting behind the laundry door, and all the just looked so ordinary, but they were calling out to everybody, and in the house no one was answering. So they got really curious. So they thought to go upstairs, and when they reached upstairs, there was a very different story. What they found was described by both police and paramedics as one of the most gruesome crimes seen in all over the South Wales history. There were blood everywhere. They first checked the master bedroom, where they found Lily's body laying on top of the bedsheet, and she had been bludgeoned to death. The room was soaked in blood. Across the hall, they checked Irene's room and found pretty much the same scene. She was found slumped up against the bed, covered in blood. And then they went to Henry and Terry's room, and there was also pretty much the same situation. It was an absolute horrific scene. The entire Min family had been murdered beside Brenda, who was in her trip in New Caledonia with her school. Min's body they couldn't find anywhere. After this discovery, Kathy ran downstairs and called 000, and this call was so frustrating. If you want, you can check out the audio in the YouTube, and there the operator was behaving so rudely and very impatient, and he was not trying to understand the situation of Kathy, and kind of really rude. And it is okay, I mean, it's understandable that when someone is so panic and frustrated and really traumatized, it is really difficult to get instruction, get information out of them. But as a operator, you should also understand the situation they are in. So I think that was something that I didn't like. During the call, you can hear that Kathy was begging Robert not to leave her, but Robert was like, "Let me go and bring your parents, they should know." And he just left Kathy alone, terrified and traumatized, and he just went for an hour drive away to bring the parents, which was really odd. I mean, not even finding out Min's body, not even knowing who was the perpetrator, who did this thing, or what if Min did this thing, not knowing anything, he just went to bring his laws. I mean, that makes no sense, but anyways, he just went. Eventually, when Robert came back with Min's parents, the detectives told them that they couldn't find Min's body, and at the time Kathy told them that to check underneath the dune of the master bedroom, and sure enough they went there and they found Min's body, and he was also bludgeoned to death, and he was quite unrecognizable, and his situation was such odds that first they thought that he was been shot on the face, but later the post-mortem report came and everyone was killed in the same way. It was determined that the murder was happened during 2 to 5:30 a.m. in the morning. The electricity of the house had been cut by the powerhouse what was outside of the house. There was no sign of forced entry. It identifies or kind of seems as though whoever the perpetrator was knew the family, was in the family, and knew the layout of the family. It seemed a crime of passion. It was determined that a hammer kind of a weapon was used to carry on the crime, and it must had a rope attached to it so that the murderer or perpetrator could not lose his grip, and it was described by the paramedics. Later, the post-mortem report came out, and it was described that the five murders were caused by two things. First, the asphyxiation, and second, the bludgeon to death or blood force trauma, which means the victims were first suffocated or asphyxiated by a hand or something, and then they bludgeoned to death. It believed that Min and Lily were murdered first, and they received the most violent and most brutal torture of all the victims. Their bedroom was covered in blood. The bed was soaked in blood. There was blood on floor, walls, ceiling, on the door, on the wall charger, on the phone. It was blood everywhere. Lily's sister Irene, whose room was just across the hall, was determined to have been murdered the next. She was found slumped against the bed in her room, and the scene looked very similar to the master bedroom. Blood splattered everywhere. It also determined that Irene was like murdered in the same way as Min and Lily. It likely Henry and Terry were murdered at last. Their bedroom was down the hall. Their scene was slightly different. It was determined from the blood splatter that at least one of the boys was actually awake, and he kind of, I think, saw the perpetrator before he got murdered. It seems after murdering Henry and Teddy, the killer had left by going back downstairs and leaving blood smeared on the stair railings and on each and every person's door handles and everywhere except Brenda's room. The perpetrator went to every single room where members were sleeping except Brenda, which means the perpetrator knew the family, knew the layout of the house, and knew Brenda was not gonna be in her room, and they knew where Brenda's room was. The blood smeared throughout the house, which means that the killer had worn gloves. 24 bloody shoe impressions were found, and these were determined to be a men's US size 8.5 and 10.5. Min's parents were taken to hospital for the treatment of shock and therapy because after hearing about his son and his whole family's murder, they were really in shock and in really big trauma, and a lot of things were going in them. So they were also sent to hospital for their treatment. And that's it for this video, because this video will be a very long video, so I have to cut it into 2 parts. So this will be the first part and the second part will be another video. So if you like it, please give a thumbs up and keep supporting me, and the rest of the information I'll put in the second video. Until then, bye bye.